Join me as I dive into the mystery and try to uncover what really ended World War I. When we think about World War I, we often think about the Great War, the war to end all wars, one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. But have you ever stopped to think about how it actually ended? You might have learned in school that the Treaty of Versailles marked the official end of World War I. But was it really that simple? World War I lasted for 4 long years, claiming millions of lives and leaving deep scars on the world. It was a complex and multifaceted conflict that involved some of the most powerful nations of the time. So, it's natural to wonder, what finally brought it to an end? The armistice on November 11, 1918, was certainly a significant turning point. But as we explore the history of those final months, it becomes clear that there was more to the story than just a single treaty or armistice. There were countless events, decisions, and factors that all contributed to the war's conclusion. So, what's the common story we're told about the end of World War I? Well, most of us learned that the Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, marked the official end of the war. But is that really the whole story? Did the Treaty of Versailles really single-handedly bring an end to the war? The more you delve into history, the more you realize that this narrative doesn't quite add up. In fact, the Treaty of Versailles was just one part of a much larger puzzle, a complex interplay of events and decisions that ultimately led to the war's conclusion. For one thing, the treaty itself wasn't even signed until months after the armistice. So, what happened during those intervening months? And what about the various military strategies, political changes, and societal impacts that all played a role in the war's final days? The reality is that the end of World War I was a messy, complicated process that can't be summed up by a single event or treaty. It was a gradual, often painful, and sometimes confusing transition from war to peace. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. By the summer of 1918, it was clear that the tide of the war was turning in favor of the Allies. The German army was exhausted, and their war effort was crumbling. But what really sealed their fate was the entrance of the United States into the war. The American military brought a fresh wave of troops, supplies, and morale to the battlefields of Europe. And with their help, the Allies were finally able to break through the German defenses and push deep into their territory. But the war wasn't just being fought on the battlefields. There were also significant political changes taking place behind the scenes. In Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution had ousted the provisional government, and the new communist regime was pulling out of the war. In Germany, there was growing unrest and revolution as the war effort faltered. And in the United States, President Woodrow Wilson was pushing for a more progressive, liberal approach to international relations. All of these factors, military strategies, political changes, and societal impacts, were interconnected, influencing each other in complex ways. And it was this delicate interplay that ultimately led to the war's. So, what was the pivotal moment or decision that finally brought the war to an end? There are many contenders, but one key event stands out: the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II on November 9, 1918. The Kaiser's abdication marked a fundamental shift in the German government and paved the way for the armistice. It was a turning point that marked the beginning of the end of the war. The armistice on November 11, 1918, was the culmination of all these factors coming together. It marked the end of the fighting, but it was just the beginning of the longer, more difficult process of rebuilding and making peace. In the end, the Treaty of Versailles was just one part of this process. It was a flawed, imperfect attempt to impose peace on a battered world, but it was also a necessary step towards healing and rebuilding. When we look back on the end of World War I, We need to remember that it was a complex, multifaceted process that can't be reduced to a single event or treaty. It was a gradual, often painful, transition from war to peace. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the mystery of what really ended World War I. If you've got thoughts on the war's end, let me know in the comments below. And if you want to explore more about this fascinating period in history, be sure to check out our next video on the rise of the Weimar Republic.